So welcome to our event. I'm Ruben Navarrette. I'm a syndicated columnist, author, daily journalist, and most important for our purposes, I'm also the friend of someone named Daniel Lubetzky, who is a good friend of mine. We've known each other a long time. He's an entrepreneur. He's the author of a great book I recommend called Do the Kind Thing. He is the founder and CEO of Kind Snacks, which is really a global brand that's been very successful. He heads a foundation. He tries to do work all over the world. He has done work over the years all over the world. And also for our purposes, he's also the subject of a recent feature that I was pleased to write for Hispanic Executive Magazine in a series we call Conversations at the Top. You can find that online at HispanicExecutive.com. I want to welcome my friend Daniel Lubetzky. How are you, my friend?
Hola, Ruben. It's nice to see you.
Great to see you always. So the theme of this event is creating change, something you're very familiar with, something you've been familiar with even predating the founding of Kind Snacks. As I said, you're an enormously successful brand. As both an entrepreneur and advocate for causes that you believe in, like global education and better nutrition, you spent your whole career trying to create change. Where did that impulse come from? Was it your own family history, from watching your parents as you were growing up? What is your clearest memory of having that instinct to create change?
It's a great question that I don't think has an easy answer. Probably has something to do with me being an immigrant, children of immigrants, a son of a Holocaust survivor. As you know, Ruben, I was born in Mexico. My mom was born in Mexico, but my dad immigrated from Eastern Europe after surviving the Holocaust, and my mom's parents also had been immigrants. And probably learning from an early age about what my dad went through and learning from my mom and dad about the importance of building bridges and improving the world, it's probably what's driven me all my life, and from a very early age helped me find a meaning and a higher purpose for everything I do. I mean, I've done, like you said, a lot of businesses, a lot of nonprofits and civic organizations and movements, but the common thread in everything I do is trying to shatter stereotypes, cement relationships, build bridges, and try to prevent what happened to my dad from happening again to other human beings. But there's a deeper question in you, and I don't have an answer. Like, I have a very big sense of justice. I'm not a believer in the astrological signs, but I'm Libra, and I'm very much driven by a sense of fairness and justice. And a lot of what I find when there's injustice, I really am driven to try to help the downtrodden and those that are being taken advantage of or bullied. And I imagine it has something to do with how my parents taught me to protect others and stand up for those that are being mistreated.
Well, you know, in the time that I've known you, there are plenty of people who are not as successful as you, who've tried to be successful, but haven't quite achieved that level. But they are very self-focused. We're almost taught as a society, focus on yourself, focus on your business. You know, don't look at anything else and don't be distracted by anything else. But the entire time that I've known you, you've always looked outward. You've always thought about the world. I mean, you were, I get into this later in my questions, but you were on airplanes flying back and forth. The first time I interviewed you, you said, I live on an airplane, because you were flying back and forth from the US to the Middle East. You were creating a program for cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians. And so that is interesting, because you have, as you've risen and become successful, you haven't ever just focused on Daniel, like, I'm only going to think about myself or my family. You actually always look outward.
So two things to what you said. Number one, what does success mean? Because you said that when you met me, you were not as successful. Now I'm successful. What does success mean? Because I talk to my children all the time, and they're young. They're ages 7, 9, and 11. And they, you know, they were like, Daddy, who's more successful? You or Mommy? You or this other friend? And I'm like, how do you define success? What is success? Like, financially, you're right. I became a very big thing in the last 10, 15 years. And I'm very blessed that I have now resources to do the work. But when I was running Peace Works, when I met you, which is a company trying to bring Arabs and Israelis together to promote peace through business, and when I started the One Voice movement to tried to build a movement of moderates in the Middle East, trying to end the conflict. If you had asked me back then if I was successful, financially I was not, but I loved what I was doing. And I think success is defined by you pursuing what you believe in. And I told you that I was blessed to find from an early age something that gave me meaning, which in my case is building bridges. But if you spend enough time talking to yourself and understanding yourself on what gives you meaning, and for every human being, it's going to be a completely different definition. If you really understand what gives you a higher sense of purpose, it's because it cannot be making money. Money is a means to an end. But if you find something that you care about and then you're pursuing it, and that journey itself should be success, so long as you're pursuing what you believe in and giving it your best. And to your question about being outward looking, I like the way you said it, because some people use the word altruism, and it's wrong. I'm not altruistic. I'm not an angel. I call it enlightened self-interest. I am very aware of the fragility of the human condition, again, because of what my father went through. And so I never take any of these things for granted. And I recognize that we need to be actors and protagonists in our lives and in our greater worlds and our communities, because nobody else is going to do it for us. Like every single time that I've noticed the problem and then I've tackled to see, wait, who's solving it? It's not being done as well as it could be done. Even when you think government should be handling it, if you leave it to others to solve the most intractable problems, right, we're going to have the bad news for society. And we have plenty of challenges. So we all need to recognize that we have the power and the responsibility to be protagonists in our brother communities.
So you say that your children ask you sometimes, who's more successful, you or mommy? I get that question in our house. The answer is always mommy. And I think I'd have to say it's also pretty close in your house as well. Your wife is a doctor.
Yeah.
She's a specialist, which leads me to my next question. Hispanics have long struggled with chronic health issues. And certainly in the COVID-19 era, that's referred to as having pre-existing morbidities. And it's one of the reasons that Hispanics are being infected at a higher rate and dying at a higher rate when infected. Why do you think that is, that Hispanics struggle with chronic health issues? Is it cultural? Is it related to a lack of access to reliable and quality health care? And more importantly, what can we do as a community and as business leaders, really as business leaders, to create change in that space and make our community healthier?
Yeah, first, I completely agree with you. My wife, that's what I told my kids. Your mom is saving lives. That's far more important than anything that we do. I think there are a few answers to your question. First of all, at the most immediate level from the work that I do, there's nutrition and food consumption. We need to change our patterns. In Mexico, where I was raised, obesity and diabetes is soaring. And in the Hispanic communities in the United States, there's all these food deserts where people don't have access to healthy foods. And as you may know, Ruben, over the last few decades, society has made enormous progress to tackle infectious diseases. It's a little ironic to talk about that during COVID times, but overall, we have been able to tackle infectious diseases over the last several decades, and the deaths from infectious diseases have been going down, but deaths from inflammatory diseases are going up and up and up. And there's a very strong correlation of inflammatory diseases to lifestyle, and specifically to what we eat. There's increasing reliance on empty calories, on refined carbohydrates, on refined sugars. And that is bad for you because it spikes up your blood sugar levels. It doesn't deliver you real nutrition. It just delivers you carbohydrates and sugars. And we need to try to find a way to help our community to eat more nutritious, wholesome foods. And then the last question the last thought that I have on what you said, I'm reading a book or listening to an audiobook called Sapiens. And it talks about how when humanity starts creating a bias against a particular group, it gets harder to get out of that loop. So groups that have been socioeconomically disadvantaged, you know, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and it's a very serious problem. And we need to try to find structural ways to try to elevate all of society. There's a lot of our community and a lot of our American citizens getting left behind. And it's not good for anybody because eventually that catches up with you, and that's how you end up with enormous instability. So we need to work very assertively to improve education, improve healthcare access to all citizens.
You have a global perspective. Your initiatives are international in scope. Your business is international. As you mentioned, you were born in Mexico City. You were raised in the United States, in San Antonio. Now you live in New York.
I lived in Mexico till I was 16. I turned 16 in San Antonio, Texas. And I was, sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all, not at all. For many years, you traveled, as I said, regularly to Israel and the Middle East to advocate for peace and cooperation. Now, what role can and should entrepreneurs, business leaders, CEOs like yourself play in changing the way that Americans see their place in the world and creating that kind of change, and maybe also changing how the world sees America?
Wow, that's a big question. I think, first of all, I just go back to, it's not one size fits all. Every single human being needs to find their own journey and their own meaning. And we spend way too much time on our cell phones and checking Twitter and Facebook and Tukur, all these different things. You know, I almost don't do social media. Most of my social media is my team actually doing it. And I find it very dangerous that we, even before the advent of all this internet and social media, we didn't spend enough time with ourselves, talking to ourselves about what matters. We're just rushed in society. You need to find the time to just listen to yourself. And then for those like I, where there is meaning in your question, where we really do want to be agents of change for improving society, and we need to find our way to do that, I do find enormous value in trying to get our fellow citizens to appreciate that the United States is the most incredible experiment of all nations, and that there are things that we've taken for granted that should not be taken for granted anymore, and that all of us have the power and responsibility to defend democracy and the rule of law and freedom and respect. These are essential values that have made America what it is today and that are truly under threat. And unless all of us rise up to defend them, we might lose them. And, you know, if my country where I was born in Mexico ends up faltering on rule of law or democracy, some people expect it, and it's an evolving change in that country. And if in Israel and Palestine we get peace or not peace, it'll be tragic for me because I care about it, but the world's not going to fall apart. But if democracy falls in the United States, if rule of law becomes the joke that it's been in other places, if freedom is no longer to be, you know, expected, and we're afraid to speak our minds because we're going to be intimidated by politicians or bullied, the rest of the world is going to suffer enormously too. So I think these times that we're living through are extraordinarily consequential. And, you know, Ruben, you and I are more or less the same age. I think I'm a little older than you, but we've been very blessed over the last 70 years. There's been obviously some tragedies from 9/11 to different wars, but directionally since World War II, our generation has benefited enormously from growth and the advance of liberal democracies, the advance of rule of law, the advance of all these things that we take for granted today. And they're now under threat. There's a rise of authoritarianism. There's a rise of totalitarianism. There's a rise of hatred and suspicion and intolerance. And all of us have a duty. Every single human being, not just Hispanics, but every single human being needs to really recognize that if we don't start acting really to transcend our differences, to listen to each other. I like your columns. I've been reading them lately a lot, Ruben, because I got into your, like, the one that you, Navarrette Nation. And what I like is that you're very nuanced, and there's just not enough of that in the world. Like, everybody's black or white, blue or red, and we need to really fight hard to listen to each other. And it's very hard because how do you do it in a day and age where values matter so much and these values are being trampled? And so how do you find the balance between protecting those values and being empathetic and listening to those that have a different position from ours? It is not easy, but unless all of us really work harder to it, we really are in a lot of trouble.
So in your book, Do the Kind Thing, which I recommend to a lot of people, including people who are starting out in business. I think if you are an entrepreneur, you have an idea, you've already built your company, it's just sort of a baby company, it's just growing, you're still not sure if you should get up in the morning or just close it all down, right? I recommend your book because it blends together the personal stories of your upbringing and your family with your stories of successes and failures in business. That's all woven together very nicely. You would be the first to say that early on, there were more failures than successes. Yeah. And that you love those experiences, you value them. They're valuable to you because you learned from them and in turn became successful from learning about your mistakes and failures. Now, you've also over the years learned a lot about US corporate culture and the business community, the other CEOs that are out there. What do you think needs to change in that arena? What should be the guiding principles for CEOs?
So first, failures and successes, again, these are words that we imagine as human beings to mean something that might mean something else in other cultures. So a failure is not necessarily a failure if it teaches you things that are gonna make you successful the following day. So absolutely, Ruben, the first 10 years when I was running Peaceworks, you could say that it was a failure from a business standpoint because I struggled every day to make ends meet, and there's many reasons why you could list countless failures, but on the other side, every one of those failures are directly connected to the reasons why Kind succeeded, because I learned from those mistakes the lessons. So as long as you're being introspective and thinking critically about what brought those failures and learning from them, I think it's good to try things out and do your best. And when you fall, just get up again. As far as corporate culture, I think one of the things that needs to happen is to encourage that introspection also, is to encourage corporate leaders to have humility and to attract people that are smarter than them at what they do, with specialists that can teach them and elevate their game. I've seen a lot of examples of companies that I respect a lot, CEOs that I respect a lot, and then I get closer to them, I realize that the people around them don't want to say what needs to be said. They're afraid to speak up. And it is extraordinarily dangerous. I see it happening at Kind sometimes where, I'm the guy that you knew, I don't know, decades ago, and I'm the same person. And so the people who have been with me along the ride know that I'm a putz and they can, every time I say we need to do this, what I tell my new team members is, carries an asterisk, as long as you agree that it makes sense. If you find out as you start implementing it that it doesn't make sense, don't do it. But there is this danger that as you get success, the people that are with you think that you know better, or that you think that you know better, or they're afraid to speak their minds. And you have to create a culture where people understand that their voice is as important as yours. It might be more important because it requires you to really create that space for them to be comfortable speaking up. And they might be seeing things that you no longer see. So I think creating a culture that's non-hierarchical, where everybody's voice is recognized, where you have created a culture of ownership. At Kind, every single full-time team member is a fellow shareholder. They have an economic stake in our success. If we profit and if we grow, they benefit alongside us. Everybody's a fellow shareholder. But it's not just a financial question, it's a question of culture. And by no means are we perfect at Kind, because I notice quite often, alarmingly, that I find out that we were doing things because I said they should be done, even though they made no sense. And people didn't tell them to me because, well, you said we needed to do this. Right. So it's a constant journey for everybody.
Right. I think that's why God gave me a wife to tell me that I'm wrong when I'm wrong. And Avesta should hold up my column and say, you know what, this column you wrote, it's the dumbest thing I've ever read by anybody ever, So
your wife too? I thought it was just mine.
No, that's a great purpose. They love us, but they love us enough to tell us the truth.
Yes. So, and it's important to create that culture also with your spouse, and especially when you're achieving some level of success or you run your own company. My wife always reminds me, this is not your company, this is our partnership. And
Right. My final question as we wrap up, and thank you so much for your time today, my friend. I know that you're often asked, what advice would you give baby entrepreneurs, those newly minted CEOs who are just starting out? I want to put a different twist on that question just a little bit. Ask it this way. For those Hispanic executives who are starting ventures or launching companies, and right now they're just laser focused 24/7 on that venture, and they're not thinking about anything else at all, including making change, maybe making change is the last thing they're thinking about, what would you tell them about how it's possible to do both from your own experience? How it's possible to create change and really make that an admirable goal of any business?
Again, I just want to have enough humility to remind myself that for every person, their journey is different. But that said, I will embrace your question because I personally believe in it very much. I think we live in a day and age where the power of business is far greater than any other force out there, right? In the medieval century, in the medieval times, the church was the organizing structure. And, in the 16th and 17th centuries, it was the nation state that rose to really control and permeate. But today, the private sector, far and away, businesses and the private sector are far more impactful in our lives than any other force. And there are enormous challenges that we're facing, like xenophobia, nuclear proliferation, climate change, plastic in our oceans, you name it, and COVID and poverty and inequality and racial prejudice. There's so many serious challenges. The only way we're going to win is if the private sector is part of the solution. It's just the only way. If you just leave it to the governments to solve it, the government's an important part of the solution, but it cannot be there alone. The private sector needs to play a role. And then the last thing I'll say out of quote unquote enlightened self-interest is the younger generation expect that more and more from companies. As long as it's authentic, they will be more loyal to companies that recognize that they're not here to just make money, that they're here to also make this a better world and to live the world a little bit better than they found it. And so I think in the future, more and more and more, as long as it's authentic, consumers are going to expect companies to do their part to improve our world.
Well, that concludes our time together. I just want to say, my friend, that, in reading about you, learning about you, and knowing you over the years, I really treasure your friendship and your example. And, you mentioned before that your father was a survivor of the Holocaust. And I was very pleased to be able to tell part of that story in the feature I wrote for Hispanic Executive Magazine. You were very open about that. I think that ironically, your father's name was Ramon, as I recall, which is my grandfather's name and my brother's name. It's a family name.
And my son's name.
Yes, it's a family name and something that brings us together. I just want to thank you for your time, your example, and your friendship over the years, and for joining us here at the Alumni Society for this important event. Daniel Lubetzky, thank you very much.
Ruben, muchas gracias, and thanks to the community for joining together, and I appreciate your time also.
Absolutely. I'm Ruben Navarrette. I'm a syndicated columnist, author, a podcast host, most importantly, contributor to Hispanic Executive Magazine, and a fan and friend of the Alumni Society. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good day.
Ruben, if you're still recording, I want to say one more thing in case you guys want to use it, because when you were asking me the question, and it's fine to just end it the way it was, but you were asking about how do you manage to do this and that, I want to give you another thought, but if you can't use it, don't use it.
Sure.
But you mentioned my book, Do the Kind Thing, and the central organizing principle of that book is the power of and. Rather than thinking with or, think with and. A lot of times in our society, we tend to think that we have to make false compromises, either choose healthy or tasty, or socially convenient, or socially impactful, or economically sustainable, or convenient, or wholesome. And the truth is that when you're able to isolate those assumptions and question why are we thinking that we can only do so that, you will often find out that those are false compromises, and you're able to create a lot of value in business, in life, in society, if you're able to challenge conventional wisdom and find a way to live with and, to pursue something with both this and that as a goal. And so in business, it's the same thing. If you're able to find a way to advance society while also running a sustainable business, it's really special.
My friend, so good to see you. Look forward to our next conversation, okay?
Igualmente, Ruben. Un abrazo.
Bye.